Deltarune is a game that I'm sure for most people needs basically no introduction. With the game's first chapter being released back in 2018 by creator Toby Fox, Deltarune by this point has cemented itself as an absolute legend among the indie game sphere. The game features many different attributes that are very much worth praising. The very solid gameplay mechanics, creative ideas featured throughout the entire game, and of course the game's absolutely masterful writing and characterization. The first 4 chapters of the game were already absolutely incredible, and the release of chapters 3 and 4 is what made Deltarune climb up to become my favorite game. And just recently, chapter 5 released, which in my opinion is probably the best chapter in the game so far. Seriously, like, I could keep gushing about it for hours, but I gotta stay focused with this video. One aspect of the game that's become pretty well known at this point is its use of meta storytelling. The player is a separate entity in-universe from the main protagonist, Chris. And unlike other protagonists, Chris definitely does not seem to be the most willing vessel for the player. There's several points in the game where they straight up remove the soul and thus our influence on them to go and act on their own. This results in a very interesting conundrum, especially since, given everything we've seen in the game, Chris absolutely has their own plans separate from the rest of the Fun Gang, as well as the whole Roaring Knight faction. The normal route of the game definitely seems to focus more on us working with Chris, or at least attempting to in some capacity, with Chris possibly not quite realizing this given our lack of ability to communicate with them. Chris on their own is a genuinely fascinating and nuanced character that blurs the line between protagonist and antagonist on the main route. However, as you may have noticed by my phrasing, the main route of the game is by no means the only one. Hidden in the game's second chapter, there's a second, different route. One far darker than the main one. One where we forcefully establish control over Chris. One filled with depravity from the soul. A route where, in every sense of the word, the player of the game becomes the villain. And of course, I'm referring to the weird route. The Weird Route essentially serves as the spiritual successor to the Genocide route in Undertale. However, for me, the Weird Route is far darker, and additionally it takes the meta-horror aspects of the Genocide route and goes in a different direction with them. Instead of focusing on the player killing all the monsters and stuff, the Weird Route focuses a lot more on how we as the player can impact the characters in Chris's life, our ability to alter the game, and all of the consequences that come with that. Almost a full year ago I uploaded a video discussing the Weird Route, but in hindsight, that video is not only outdated, but really wasn't a great video in my opinion. So in order to hopefully make up for that video, I decided to take another look at the Weird Route with the stuff we have now, and this time, hopefully, I'll do a better job at actually analyzing it. Specifically, I'll be focusing on how it manages to create such effective horror, as well as trying to focus a bit on the lore and see if there's anything I can glean from it. A little bit of my Chapter 4 footage is a bit older before a certain update to the game. I'll make sure to explain when we get to that segment, but just keep that in mind. It's also almost guaranteed that there's at least one small secret in the Weird Route that I missed for this video. Keep in mind, I am by no means an expert on the game, and as of recording this, it is currently 1 day after Chapter 5 released. Yes, I sat down and basically did a whole marathon yesterday to beat Chapter 5 on my own. And while, as far as I'm aware, I've seen everything related to the weird route in Chapter 5, it's pretty much guaranteed that possibly even during this video's production, there's gonna be new details coming out. Now, with all the disclaimers out of the way, if you would like to chat with me or my community directly, feel free to join my Discord server. The invite link is on the screen and in the description below. Additionally, if you end up enjoying this video, please feel free to leave a like and consider subscribing. And if you have any thoughts you would like to share, feel free to comment. Of course, though, this is all up to you. If you don't want to, you don't have to, but it would be greatly appreciated if you did. So anyways, it's time to proceed into the weird route. Deltarune's darkest path. Despite being the first chapter the weird route is able to be accessed in, Chapter 2 doesn't really give you any opportunities to initiate it until you're already fairly deep into the chapter. In fact, at no point early in the chapter is it implied that an alternate route even exists. So if you went into your playthrough blind, you'd probably assume by this point that Chapter 2 plays out pretty much the same way as Chapter 1 with there being no alternative routes. However, if this is your second playthrough, you might have figured out that there's a second path you can take in this chapter, especially given a certain minigame you can find in Chapter 3. However, your actual opportunities to initiate the route don't really begin until Chris has been separated from Susie and Ralsei. You're only given the opportunity to initiate the route after Noelle joins your party. You know, right after the whole "don't let him find me" scene with Queen and Birdley, which, side note, this is one of my favorite scenes to this day, unironically. Like, this stuff is why I love Queen as a character. It's just really funny. Something worth noting is that Chris and Noelle already have a history with each other. The Dreamer and Holiday families used to be fairly close, likely as a result of Azriel and December respectively dating. December happens to be Noelle's older sister, and Chris and Noelle used to actually be pretty close. However, after December went missing / died / became the Night, they ended up drifting apart, and now this is their first time really connecting in a long time. At the end of the normal route in this chapter, they end up legitimately becoming friends again, and a new relationship starts to blossom between Noelle and Susie. However, in the weird route, we're not following the intended path. We're forging our own path, and this is very much apparent even from the first progression point of the weird route. In order to even begin the weird route, you have to go back. Instead of continuing into the Cyber City, you have to backtrack to the dump. Noelle herself even notes that this seems to be the wrong way. Although this doesn't convey anything immediately, it already implants the idea in the player's mind that the weird route is something they shouldn't be doing, or at the very least that the path they're currently following isn't the right one. Noelle's role in your party during the time she's in it is that of an ice mage. She's got a bunch of various different spells, however the most important one for this route is the spell Ice Shock. So in battle, you may be curious and decide to use it just to see what it does. As you can see right here, the spell Ice Shock, instead of losing recruits, freezes the enemy. Normally, when you defeat an enemy using violence, you lose the ability to recruit them. This isn't the case with Ice Shock. Instead, it has a special third status that it inflicts on the enemy: frozen. And unlike the other attacks where the enemies are able to run away before they're actually killed, Ice Shock leaves what remains of them frozen in the overworld. Although not the most immediate or groundbreaking change in the world, this new, unique status applied to the enemies already implies that there's something inherently different about Noelle's Ice Shock ability. You might have also noticed a very unique and distinctive sound effect playing whenever we froze the enemy. This sound plays at every point of progression in the weird route. It starts to become sort of haunting the more and more you hear it, and the actual sound itself is strange. In order to actually reach the first big point of the weird route, you have to keep constantly freezing all of the enemies in the area. This establishes the theme of repetition, which is very prevalent in the weird route. Even more subtle hints start to appear that something might not be right as the city starts to empty out and the cars start to disappear. This isn't overly in your face or obvious, and you might even be forgiven for not noticing it. However, it's just significant enough of a change to signal to the player's brain that something's different. Something's not quite right. The fact that it's so understated amplifies its strength further as the music remains upbeat and cheery despite things starting to seem a little off. No, not that kind. Not that kind. There's a little optional interaction at the first annoying mouse room puzzle. Instead of solving the puzzle, you have the option to just keep pushing forward, however Noelle keeps insisting that you come back and solve the puzzle. If you keep persisting though, you can eventually choose to either do the puzzle or say, proceed. This causes Noelle to wonder when Chris got so bossy, and this is the first time the word proceed appears in the weird route, a word that becomes of vital importance throughout the rest of the route. Another optional interaction happens at the poster of the Ferris wheel. Noelle has her usual dialogue wondering if Susie would want to ride the Ferris wheel with her, but on the weird route there's a new dialogue option you have other than just whether or not Susie would. You can assert that, quote, I will ride with you. Noelle talks about how she doesn't trust it, which is understandable, Chris is a bit of a gremlin, but then another dialogue option shows up. Noelle will ride with me. The weird route makes frequent usage of the first person in the dialogue options. It's not very common that this happens in the normal route of the game, which makes it feel even more off-putting and unsettling in the weird route, and it's an early indication already that this isn't what Chris wants. Instead, it has a lot more to do with us, the soul, the player of the game. The usage of the first person makes the player feel more directly involved with the situation, like they're actively using the dialogue box to state their own desires, asserting themselves as their own character in the story in a way. When all of the enemies have been frozen, you then have to interact with the Addison that offers Chris and Noelle dating shoes. When he asks if you're together, you have to say that you and Noelle are something else. The first of many sort of romantic implications, and this is the first point in the route that is a major turning point.
If you're something else, maybe a dating shoes isn't right. Maybe I could interest you in a freeze ring?
Sorry, I don't think we need something like that.
Come on, Angel. You can't get stronger without good equipment.
Stronger? Right. I guess that is how things work here. Chris buying me a ring. Yeah, right. Huh? Chris, you'd buy it for me? Sure, I guess we could ask about it. How much does it cost?
Just a small fee of 2,026 dark dollars.
Huh? Sorry, we don't have that much money. Still, it was nice of Chris to offer.
From here, you can either back down and accept that you don't have enough money, or you can keep pushing Noelle.
Huh? Me? You were asking me to get it? What? You weren't asking me to just... No, Chris, not me. I could never...
You got the freeze ring.
What just happened? Did I just... No, they must have given it to us. Besides, it's good to get stronger, isn't it? Thanks, Chris.
The silence following this moment becomes so loud it's deafening. We've now gotten the freeze ring for Noelle, which increases her magic ability, but at what cost? The sound effect that plays when the screen goes black is the same sound effect used when Noelle casts Ice Shock, but it's also implied that the Addison is somehow trapped inside the ring. The entire scene has masterful utilization of sound design, and ironically, it's because of the music fading out. By this point, everything felt subtly a little off, but not quite in your face enough to scream that you're doing something deeply wrong. This scene changes that. The fact that the music completely cuts out when the Addison asks if you're interested in the freeze ring makes the player feel as though they're breaking the game's script. This is compounded further with Noelle's surprised and shocked reactions. Noelle's reactions serve as a parallel to the game's reactions. The reaction to us doing something we weren't expected to. Us, for the first time, starting to go off script. Compounding this further is the lack of music. It creates a feeling that the game itself is sentient somehow, or at least reacting to what we're doing, and it makes the player feel as though they're entering into uncharted territory, somewhere where you could even say, nobody has ever gone before. The act of getting a ring for Noelle, or rather forcing Noelle to get the ring that you can then equip onto her, is an interesting choice narratively. The specific choice of a ring almost makes it feel as though it's some sort of proposal, or at least gives the image of that. But in this instance, there's nothing wholesome going on. After all, we just ordered Noelle to take the ring by force. The ring is not a symbol of union, it is a symbol of power over her. And the fact of the matter is, Noelle didn't even want the ring in the first place. We are directly imposing our will onto her and deciding for her whether she gets it or not. We are starting to strip Noelle of her agency, at least temporarily. There's another noticeable change in Noelle in the next scene. At the lightning switch puzzle nearby, unlike how it goes in the normal route, Noelle actually offers to be the one to hold the first switch down, but if you pay attention, you'll notice that she shifts a little bit while she's on the switch. And since we're the player, we're able to hear her thoughts, and it's revealed that she was tempted to step off of the switch. This is the first sign that we're not just manipulating Noelle to do our bidding, we're also bringing out something in her that was already dormant, a darker side to her mind, temptations. Something she's keeping below the surface that we're forcefully drudging up and exploiting and using to our advantage. This also serves as an interesting parallel to the player. Just like the player, Noelle knows that if she were to step off the switch, or in the player's case, the intended path of the game, something really, really bad is going to happen, and yet she still has the thought of doing it, the urge to, despite knowing it's wrong. But in Noelle's case, she resists the temptation. The player of the game in the weird route is not. To make our presence further known to Noelle, and to further establish our control over her, we have to tell her that it's natural to think this way, despite the fact that she knows it isn't. But in the process, we also confirm to her that even in her own mind, she's not safe from the player, even if she might not fully realize the extent of it yet, because ultimately, she's just a character in a game, and as a result, all of her internal thoughts and monologues are visible to us. And then, the tone indicating our progress plays once more. Now, the true bulk of the weird route has begun. The music has returned, but it's not the same as it was before. Now it's been slowed and pitched down slightly. Many parts of the track are cut out from it, and something about the tempo/progression of the song makes it feel off. It adds more dissonance to the song. It makes it feel almost like it's held together with duct tape, as though each note is only stumbling into the next one rather than melodically flowing. On top of this, the music has far less instruments than the regular Cyber City theme. There's a more noticeable echo to each of the notes too, which overall makes the song feel more hollow, more empty and isolated. And given just how low the population density of the Cyber City is becoming as a direct result of our actions, it makes sense. But this is not to distract from us freezing all of the Darkners. In Undertale's genocide routes, killing each monster could at least hypothetically be somewhat justified. After all, we had to wait for an enemy encounter, and even though we were walking around looking for them, the enemy engaged us first. But in the weird route, once the enemies spot you after you've gotten the freeze ring, they run away from you. This one small change from Undertale's genocide route makes the player much more personally responsible for all of the results that follow. This time, there's no excuse. Even if the violence is just a means to an end for us, the blood still remains on our hands. And even though it's technically Noelle casting the spell, we're the ones commanding her to do it. At this point in the route, we can still cancel it at any time, and yet we choose not to. Once again, just like Noelle with the Switch, we know it's wrong, maybe even feel bad about it, and yet we do it anyway. Before anybody comments anything, yes, I am aware that in the Mantle minigame, it is implied that at least some part of Chris is enjoying what's happening, knowing they can say it's not really them. However, it's very evident from all of Chris's other actions, as well as their attempts to undo the effects of the route in Chapter 4 should we proceed, that this is a side of them that they're actively repressing. I am not saying that Chris is some perfect innocent angel that's done no wrong. Chris is not a saint by any means. They're a complex character. What I am saying is the objective reality of the situation. Chris is not an adult. They are a teenager. And on top of that, they are a very deeply scarred and traumatized teenager. And as someone who graduated high school relatively recently, being a teenager is already rough as is. It's an absolute emotional mess to be a teenager, and teens are not exactly always known for making very rational decisions. And this isn't even considering the traumatizing event that Chris witnessed, or the fact that they're the only human in Hometown, or the fact that they're literally dealing with entire other worlds. And on top of that, the weight of whatever happens at the end of the prophecy that they've been clearly trying to stop. Yes, Chris often acts antagonistic towards the player, but at the same time, they very clearly have their own plan. And plus, they don't have any direct line of communication with the player. So even assuming we were completely 100% trustworthy, how are they supposed to know that? That's right, they can't. So from their perspective, it's probably best to not take any chances. My point being that their mistreatment of the soul is nothing like what we're doing to Chris in the weird route. They already resent us for controlling them, and here, we're just taking even more control away from them. As we progress further and further into the Cyber City, the uncanny, off-putting feeling only intensifies further. The massive, multi-lane highways, which are normally a puzzle to figure out, are completely deserted and empty. The city, once bustling with life, is having all of the life sucked out of it. By freezing all of the enemies, we're essentially taking more and more from the city until there's nothing left. This sequence of the weird route in Chapter 2 pretty much encapsulates the route as a whole. The player's desire to break away from the game's intended path, the desire to seek out something more, to go beneath the surface of the game's story. All of it leads to us activating the weird route, and as the route progresses, we start to essentially take more and more from the game, until eventually it becomes too late to turn back, and things start to break down. One really subtle change that adds to the psychological uncanniness of the weird route in Chapter 2 is Noelle's battle animations. Normally, her battle animations are really nervous, and you can tell she's really not confident about fighting, but once you've acquired the freeze ring, even her idle animation changes as she looks down rather than straight ahead. She has noticeably higher confidence, but her movements feel off. Normally when battles end with Noelle, she breathes a quick sigh of relief, but after you've gotten the freeze ring, it's like she's in a prayer. Once again, this is another instance of divine imagery associated with Noelle in the weird route. It almost fits into the stereotypical chosen one trope in fantasy. We, the player of the game, are the divine entity in question, and Noelle is the chosen one. Chosen by us to do our bidding. Except, in this instance, the trope is basically flipped on its head. Instead of this being some heroic or noble thing, it's deeply wrong, almost blasphemous feeling. Going back to Noelle's battle animations, the choice to make her look down during her idle animation instead of straight at the enemy might just seem like a small little choice to unsettle the player slightly. However, this actually serves as an indication as to what Noelle is doing internally. During most of the weird route of Chapter 2, she's dissociating. For any who are unaware of what dissociation is, it essentially is the experience of detaching yourself from reality. Almost like a sort of daydreaming but different. On screen right now is a definition provided by psychologytoday.com. It puts it into words better than I can, but that's essentially what dissociation is, and most importantly, it most often results from high stress and/or trauma. Even outside of the weird route, Noelle has a missing, potentially dead sister, constant academic pressure, an emotionally cold, strict mother, a father who is currently hospitalized, and multiple other issues going on. It's important to note, though, even though I plan to go into psychology in college, I am by no means in any way, shape, or form an expert on the matter, so take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt. However, I personally believe that during the weird route, our actions directed towards Noelle are essentially pushing her to the point where she is dissociating. There's another interaction over at the second annoying mouse room. To progress the route, we have to push Noelle further and further towards the laser. Eventually, she freezes the puzzle over. Notably though, after she freezes the puzzle over, in her mind, she starts trying to justify our actions. We weren't trying to hurt her. We were just trying to make her stronger. This established line of thinking from Noelle continues further on the more we progress in the weird route. And if I can be completely honest for a moment, even thinking about it right now makes me feel a little ill. This line of thinking is almost identical to toxic relationships, where the victim is gaslighted by the abuser so much that they start to justify the abuser's actions in their own head. They weren't trying to hurt me, I just was doing something wrong. It wasn't this, it was XYZ. I've known people who have been in situations like this, and the way they're out makes you feel directly responsible for Noelle starting to think this way makes me feel vile. What we're essentially doing here is reinforcing her new patterns of behavior we're establishing. We're conditioning her to obey us. We prompt her to freeze the enemy, we prompt her to proceed, and the reward, the positive reinforcement here, is her getting stronger, and as a result, she starts to become more dependent on us, and the more dependent on us she is, the more willing she is to obey us. We treat her basically like a fucking dog. It's hard to watch. The player in this instance is essentially the abuser of this situation. It may not be a literal romantic relationship in the weird route, but it parallels that type of situation perfectly. Real-life toxic relationships may not involve literally freezing people, or pushing someone close to a laser, or other stuff that the weird route entails, and yet despite that, this part of the route feels so viscerally real to me. I'm sorry to go on a tangent like this. I'll get back to the main portion of the video. Where we would normally find the moss in the normal route as well as the egg room, instead we find Spamton inside the dumpster. He offers us something but refuses to give it to us until we've cleared the city of all the enemies. And just like the Genocide Route save points in Undertale, Spamton tells us how many there are left. Spamton isn't just a passive observer, he is directly taking advantage of what we're doing. Just like the player of the game, Spamton is exploiting what's happening on the weird route for his own gain, and we, the player, are exploiting the dark side of Noelle's mind and the trauma she's already been through for our own advantage. Both the player and Spamton directly push the route forward, and just like the Addison from earlier, Spamton refers to Noelle as Angel. Compounding the divine imagery further, the item he gives us once we've cleared all of the enemies is a thorn ring. A ring of thorns, similar to the crown of thorns. The allusion to Christianity is an interesting choice. We're essentially making Noelle into a martyr for us, except there's nothing righteous about this. There is nothing truly holy going on, unlike the story of Jesus in Christianity. Noelle is being used here for a nefarious purpose. For the record, personally, I am not religious. I'm not 100% positive on all the details. This is just my own interpretation of the allusion. If anybody watching this is Christian or is familiar with the story, please feel free to share any extra details that could be of importance down in the comments. All I ask is that nobody try to convince anybody to be part of one religion or not be religious. Just please don't get into that discussion. An interesting effect of the Thorn Ring is that it slowly depletes Noelle's HP. She bleeds as a result of wearing the ring. It makes her stronger, yes, but it hurts her in the process. Just like everything we've been doing up to this point. We've been making Noelle stronger stats-wise, but we've been damaging her psychologically. Not just that though, the Thorn Ring also encapsulates the player's utter apathy towards Noelle as a person. We are literally willing to harm her physically now in order to get our way. It demonstrates a complete and total lack of care for Noelle's well-being, once again, just like everything else we've done. And as for Spamton, while he's normally a shady guy, in the normal route, it's never to this extent. The way the characters act in the weird route is very different from how they act normally, as though the story of the game itself is actively reacting in real time to what you're doing. And all of this culminates in the encounter with Birdley, where things truly break down.
Noelle, there you are. Just in time. We can both go back to Queen and... Noelle?
Chris, it looks like another enemy.
Noelle? Noelle, it's me. Don't you recognize me? Noelle, are you okay? What are you doing with Chris?
We're just getting stronger.
Getting stronger? How? Chris, what are you doing?
Proceed.
What? Proceed? Where? Noelle, what are they talking about? That's it, Chris. I don't know what you're doing, but if you're hurting my friend Noelle, then I have no choice but to stop you by force. Chris, ready yourself!
But wait, Burley, stop! Run away!
With this, the most famous sequence of the Weird Route begins. The battle against Birdley. Similarly to Noelle, Birdley's battle animations are different here too. Instead of his usual condescending smug grin, Birdley has a very serious, foreboding facial expression. The genuine fear and dread of the situation is palpable through the dialogue. The fact Noelle doesn't even recognize Birdley at first assuming he's just another enemy, serves as even further evidence that this entire time Noelle's been dissociating to cope with what's been happening. When Noelle snaps out of her trance and recognizes Birdley and warns him to run away, it makes the player's stomach drop. It's clear that Noelle knows something very, very bad is about to happen. The wrongness of the situation is even further reinforced by Berdley's dialogue. Normally he's a very condescending, smug, overall not very likable person. The thing is, though, as is revealed in the normal route of Chapter 2, all of that is basically just an act. Berdley acts this way so that everybody else thinks that he's smarter than he actually is. It's to mask his insecurity. But once he realizes that Noelle is in serious danger, he completely drops the facade. Not only does this show more about his character, that he genuinely does care about Noelle, but it also adds further to the whole uncanny, off-script vibe this entire scene has. Back to the battle, though. Once you get your TP meter all the way up to 100%, you can then use one new spell added by the Thorn Ring, Snowgrave. The description just says one word: fatal. Noelle initially refuses to cast the spell, insisting that she doesn't know Snowgrave or what you're talking about, but eventually, after you keep pushing, she finally cracks and casts the spell. Everything goes quiet. Berdley is frozen in place. Enough damage has been dealt to him to defeat him in one single blow. Noelle is very clearly in shock after this happens. She's still trying to process everything. In that moment, when she casts Snowgrave, her eyes glazed over. She's clearly struggling to process what we just made her do, and as she walks away back to the Queen's mansion, she has a very noticeable, strong limp. The horror here mainly comes from just how unnatural this all feels. The way Noelle floats in the air when she casts Snowgrave is bizarre. It almost feels more like she's a marionette on strings. Up to this point in the weird route, everything we've been doing has been reversible. If we abort the route up to this point, the game behaves as though basically nothing we've done up until now happened. This isn't the case with the Snowgrave spell. Once we force Noelle to cast it, it leads to an event that is completely, 100% irreversible. Even if we abort the route after this, Berdley is still taken out of the game's main story. It's the first part of the route that leaves a permanent, lasting consequence. If you decide to then follow Noelle, it'll lead to an alleyway that is otherwise inaccessible with a manhole cover. Going through the manhole cover skips straight to the Queen's mansion. You get completely and entirely locked out of the rest of the Cyber City. None of the fun little sequences, none of the really charming dialogue, nothing. No character development, no lighthearted shenanigans. You get stripped of all of that. You deprived yourself of a huge portion of Chapter 2, some of the best sequences in it, all just to satisfy your own curiosity. And this absence of content is felt. The fact that you get sent straight to the Queen's mansion instead of having to go through the rest of the Cyber City really makes it feel like something's missing, like you've taken a shortcut that you were never intended to. The off-script feeling continues as when you reach the Queen's mansion, Susie and Ralsei are already at the entrance. This is despite the fact that in the normal route, they take the same path you do, essentially. However, this can also be explained by the fact that now, basically nobody is left in the Cyber City, so with nobody in their way, it was pretty much just a straight line. Both of them also notice something's up too. They were genuinely worried about Chris when they couldn't find them. Another thing I would like to point out is how effectively this scene manages to create an uneasy atmosphere. In the normal route, once you reach the Queen's mansion, it results in a really funny scene. This scene then leads into its own whole sequence and so on. But in the weird route, when you reach the Queen's mansion, even though there's a little bit of dialogue from Susie and Rousey, it's completely understated. This scene doesn't even have any music. It creates a feeling in the player that something's not as it should be. Susie and Rousey at this point aren't aware of what we've done to Noelle, and Chris is noticeably shaken up by everything that happened based on dialogue. With all of this, one thing is made certain. We've done something we weren't supposed to. We've made a grave mistake, and we have no idea what we're getting ourselves into. Immediately, within the foyer alone of the Queen's mansion, things are wrong. Rules Card and Lancer have already turned to stone. Lancer turning to stone at this point isn't exactly surprising, as it's roughly the same time as he does in the normal route. Rules, on the other hand, usually only turns to stone at the end of the mansion. All of the Swatchlings and Queen's waitstaff are trapped in the cafe. The majority of passages are blocked off, and with nobody to protect it, a strange force has taken over the mansion. Probably the biggest indicator that something is off is the music. The music track here is titled "The Deal Gone Wrong," and it's a very slowed down version of the theme that plays right after Spamton shows up for the first time in the normal route. If you go over to the basement where you would normally progress the Spamton Neo quest line, he's already gotten there. He's already transferred his consciousness over into the Neo robot. When you observe this in combination with the fact that all of the portraits now have Spamton's face on them, it becomes pretty obvious that the strange force that's taken over the mansion is Spamton himself. This is really strange compared with the normal route, though. Spamton Neo in the normal route is a secret boss. His full quest line is entirely optional. In the weird route, though, his quest line becomes part of the main plot. His dialogue has a different tone to it, too. Spamton's dialogue is normally over the top and bizarre, but in the weird route, his dialogue has a much more insane tone to it, in a way that feels much less cartoonish, and much more like he's genuinely losing his mind. And it's in the weird route that we see a much more malicious side to Spamton. It's already established that Spamton is desperate to get transferred into the Neo robot, and the extent of his desperation is shown in the weird route. He's willing to assist us on our absolute spree of madness, just so that way he can slip through security and enter the basement, and as such, further his own goals. Spamton's actions here are, to put it bluntly, evil, but the player is no better. The player is the one who willingly did all of this. We willingly manipulated Noelle, we willingly froze Birdley, all for the sake of satiating our own curiosity. Just like Spamton, we were willing to do all of this to further our own goals. Spamton's presence is felt all throughout the rest of the mansion. It's become infested with something called Pippus, which in-game is described to be an invasive species of freshwater clam. But it's also something very explicitly tied to Spamton, especially since when the Pippus explode, small mini Spamton faces come flying out. I've also read somewhere, and I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently back in the day during the Spamton sweepstakes, it was kind of implied apparently that they're somehow his eggs. Again, I don't know if that's true or not, and I'm honestly hoping that it isn't. Aside from what I've mentioned, the Queen's mansion becomes a stripped down, bare bones linear level. All of the most memorable sequences in it, like the acid tunnel, are completely absent. We don't even get to see the Ferris wheel scene with Susie and Noelle, because unlike the normal route, Chris outright refuses to close their eyes. They refuse to let us see what Susie and Noelle might be doing. I don't think that Chris was doing this out of spite, though. Instead, I think they might have been afraid to imagine what might be happening in there. And I think it's very likely, personally, that they're still in shock after everything that happened. Them refusing to close their eyes could easily be seen as a 1,000-yard stare. Susie refuses to talk about what happened, but it's implied that it was probably romantic in some way. Kind of like how the normal scene was, except given what's happened so far in this route, I also think it's likely that Noelle was a lot bolder than she was before. What exactly happened inside Noelle's room is left ambiguous, though. Notably, Ralsei is completely shocked by everything. He's confused and caught off guard, like we were subverting expectations of what was supposed to happen. Although Ralsei's knowledge overall is not absolute, it's shown time and time again in the game that Ralsei has extensive knowledge on what's going to happen. Seeing him caught off guard in this way feels unsettling. Once again, the game is hammering home the point that now we're going off script. Up at the mansion's rooftop, Queen is nowhere to be seen in her normal arena. She's already at the stretch right before the Dark Fountain, where normally she gives a speech leading up to the Giga Queen fight. At first, she gives the same speech as she does right before that fight, however, it differs significantly once it gets to Noelle. She's not in the giant hand. According to Queen, she's in no condition to fight right now and needs rest. And no matter how hard she's searched, she hasn't been able to find Birdly. She then transforms into the Giga Queen form, and it looks like there's gonna be a big boss fight, but Ralsei just tells her about the roaring. In the normal route, this is a pretty big moment. It gets its own dedicated cutscene that you can't skip. It's made a pretty big deal of, but in the weird route, it's completely understated once again. Just like the rest of the Queen's mansion, this scene in the weird route is stripped down and to the point. And once again, just like the rest of the Queen's mansion, we get denied of all of the fun we would have had if we just followed the normal route. We don't even get to fight Queen after this. She just gives up. There's still a little bit of humor as she accepts to go to the castle town, but this moment just feels hollow and empty. When I say this, I'm not saying this as a criticism of the game. When I say that this moment feels hollow and empty, what I mean is that it just feels wrong. And in the case of the weird route, that's the vibe it should be going for. In the case of Queen giving up so quickly, it really hits hard for the player seeing how determined she normally is throughout the rest of the chapter. Seeing her give up like this feels depressing and somber. The whole scene being so understated really sells the vibe that things are not as they should be. Our actions earlier have had a permanent, lasting effect on the game. And unlike before, Chris is sent to go seal the Dark Fountain on their own. But there's a new little area right before the Dark Fountain with a conveniently placed save point and vending machine. The fact that Chris is sent to go seal it alone already instills a sense of dread in the player. The fact that we get access to this extra room with refreshments right before the fountain and a save point furthers that dread. We know something serious is coming, and this suspicion is confirmed when we try to seal the Dark Fountain. Unlike how it normally goes, the song The Holy doesn't play, and for once, our attempt to seal the fountain gets intercepted.
Let me say thanks. Thanks to your holy shutdown sons, I have become Neo. And now it's my mansion, my city, my world. So why are you sealing the fountain? To the overrated the good part? Are you a game show host? Kid, forget it. I'm an on-snap. I'll let you pay your way out of this one. Pay. With your rapidly shrinking life.
And so, the one and only Weird Route exclusive boss fight so far begins. The alternative version of Spamton Neo. This time, Chris is completely alone for this fight. Susie and Ralsei aren't here, and as a result, the fight becomes significantly more difficult. And unlike the normal route, there's no option to spare Spamton. You have to fight. The opening speech for this fight is genuinely a little creepy. Spamton's dialogue, even when he's upset, is still bizarrely comical in some ways. He's usually very over the top with how he speaks, but right before the fight begins, he sounds genuinely angry. He's not speaking in an overly comical way. He's absolutely outraged that you would dare try to seal the fountain after everything you did for him. There's one detail too that I initially missed on my first video about this because it's very subtle. When Spamton asks why you're trying to seal the fountain, he's looking directly at the screen. He's not facing towards Chris, he's facing towards us. Although this detail won't be consciously noticed by the average person, it's still just noticeable enough to make this moment feel a lot more personal, as though Spamton's vitriol is directed at the player, not Chris. Throughout the fight, Spamton's dialogue only continues this trend. He's angry with us for what he sees as a betrayal. Despite that though, he also shows that he fully knew what he was doing when he gave us the Thorn Ring. He says he should have known that we would have used the ring for evil, but then remarks that that's exactly why he sold it to us. The reason this specific line of dialogue feels so uncomfortable is because, in a way, Spamton is essentially holding up a mirror to the player. The player at this point is likely horrified by what's happening and angry that it is happening, but do you really have the right to feel that way? You knew what you were doing was wrong. Even if you might not have known the full extent of what you were getting yourself into, you at least knew that you were doing something you weren't supposed to be. So do you really have the right to feel horrified and angry at what's happening? And in a similar way, Spamton pushed along the weird route. He sold us the Thorn Ring, and yet he's angry and upset about what we've done, even though he's directly responsible for us being able to even get to this point. Spamton and the player are essentially both manifestations of this kind of logic. Even though the motivations are different, with Spamton wanting to get into the Neo body, and the player wanting to break away from the game's intended path and satisfy their own curiosity, the hypocrisy of the situation remains the same. To clarify, I'm not saying that the actual player in the real world is a bad person for doing this route. What I'm saying is that in-universe, the player is evil for doing this route and they have no right to feel the way they do. Please keep that in mind. The fight itself feels wrong too. The fact that the chapter's secret boss is now the final boss of the chapter makes everything feel weird. Plus, at the start of the fight, there's no tutorial for how the Yellow Soul mode works. The game already knows that this is probably not your first playthrough, and as such, you don't need a tutorial for how the Soul mode works. Moreover, the fact that this is just an altered version of an already existing fight actually discourages you even more from pursuing the weird route. The only exclusive boss fight is just a harder version of an already existing fight, and in order to even get to the fight, you lose out on pretty much everything fun about the chapter, which, in my opinion, is definitely not a worthy trade-off. That's not me insulting the fight, I just wouldn't want to sacrifice a whole chapter for any exclusive boss, to be honest. The way Spamton talks about Noelle is extremely off-putting here too, and feels gross. Anytime he talks about her, he always refers to her as a hoochie mama. It's a weirdly sexual way of describing her, and this is made even more gross when you realize that 1, Noelle has absolutely no attraction to Chris, and 2, Noelle herself is a teenager. It's off-putting in a different way than everything else in this fight. Unlike everything else which makes you feel like something's wrong, this makes you just feel gross. It kinda reminds me a little bit of Alex Meyer's review of the movie Obsession, which has since been taken down because of all the backlash. That's not related to the weird route at all, I just really wanted an excuse to mention it because, god, it's genuinely one of the worst reviews I've ever seen, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, Seriously. Oh wait, I gotta get back to the video. My bad. This disgust evoked from the player is intentional, though. You're meant to feel gross when Spamton says this, and once again, in a way, it sort of holds up a mirror to the player. After all, we did say that Chris and Noelle are something else, and we specifically equipped her with rings, which are often used as a symbol of marriage and unity, despite the fact that Noelle is not interested in Chris, and we did this without her consent. The player doesn't treat Noelle as an actual person in this route, they treat Noelle as an object, just like how Spamton objectifies her. Granted, the player's objectification of Noelle isn't sexual in nature, but that doesn't make it much better. It's an uncomfortable truth. You haven't treated Noelle as an actual person. You've ignored whether or not she consents to what you do. Once again, even though it isn't sexual, that doesn't make it okay. Once again, I would like to clarify, I am strictly talking about the player in-universe. I am not saying this about the player in real life. I would be a complete hypocrite if I did that because I had to get footage of this route. And plus, the morality of this route comes from an in-universe perspective, because objectively, Noelle is a fictional character. In-universe, though, she is a person. In the game, the Weird Route is not saying the player is a sexual predator. What it is saying, though, is that we are using Noelle for our own gains as a means to an end. And as such, even though we are not preying on her sexually, we are not taking her consent and her thoughts into account. The same is true for Chris, as keep in mind, they're the one we're forcing to do all of this. And it's made very clear by the game that Chris does not want this. Yes, it is stated that part of them enjoys this by ERAM, but more likely than anything, this is a result of their own mental issues / intrusive thoughts. Just because there are intrusive thoughts of what happened and enjoying it, that does not mean that Chris truly enjoyed it. Now let me reiterate this once again. When I say that we do not take the character's consent into consideration, I do not mean that in any way, shape, or form as a sexual statement. The Weird Route is not sexual in nature. Chris and Noelle are both minors. The player in this instance is not a pedophile. In the past, there have been very widespread misinterpretations of the Weird Route, which will be addressed later. So I wanted to make it absolutely clear there is nothing sexual about the player's actions in the Weird Route. So please keep this in mind. I want to prevent those misinterpretations from spreading any further than they already have. Overall, the Weird Route version of the Spamton Neo fight is as unsettling and uncomfortable as it is because it essentially forces the player to confront themselves. You're forced to stare at yourself in the mirror. You're confronted with the uncomfortable truths of your actions, the hypocrisy of them, and overall, Spamton essentially makes a mockery of the player and forces you to confront yourself. The player's stubbornness in continuing the Weird Route, though, is reflected in the end of the fight. Spamton Neo refuses to be defeated, so he sacrifices his attack value for the sake of defense. The damage you deal to him is now pitiful, and he slowly recovers his HP. For once, Chris is truly alone and trapped. They can't win this fight. We are stuck. The only option you have is to let Chris call out for help, but no matter how much they do, nobody arrives. Spamton mocks Chris for this, saying nobody will pick up. Chris lost it all when we decided to pursue this route. The saddest part of all of this is that Spamton, in reality, is projecting onto Chris. He's projecting the fact that he lost everything. He lost everything when he was abandoned by the voice on the phone. He tried desperately calling them, but they never picked up again. And now Spamton truly has nobody, forced to live in a dumpster, and hiding from the cats now that he knows they're after him. The fact that Chris is trapped in this fight, though, is very fitting, because eventually, we get trapped in the Weird Route. Eventually, we get to a point where there's no turning back, though that discussion is for later in the video. With no other options left, we take control again. After Chris has tried calling for help, we whisper Noelle's name. Spamton is absolutely appalled. He mocks us for still, after everything, expecting Noelle to come to our rescue. But then, the room suddenly goes cold, and... Noelle responds to our call, and just like we've programmed her to do, she freezes the enemy once again. The fountain is sealed, and the cyberworld turns back into just the library's computer lab. Noelle, just like usual, assumes everything's a dream. Things are somewhat as they usually are, except for one thing. Birdley doesn't wake up. Birdley isn't dead here, but now he's been put into a comatose state from which he never wakes up from. From this point onwards, he is permanently out of the game's story. Even Susie notices that Noelle is acting different. Noelle seems like she's in a desperate rush to get out of the library. She doesn't show it, but it definitely seems like she's anxious around Chris now. When Noelle asks Susie if she has a tail and Susie denies it, Noelle seems happy at that fact. Perhaps when Susie was in her room, she saw Susie's tail, and she's asking Susie to confirm whether or not it was a dream. Susie answering no seemingly confirms in her mind that it was a dream. It's unsettling because of how much more quickly this scene ends than it does normally, alongside the fact that we can see plainly here that our actions towards Birdley in the Dark World have now permanently affected him in the Light World. The scene with Noelle visiting Rudy, her father, in the hospital shows further changes too. Now, her immediate thought is to use Ice Shock in Dragon Blazers, the same spell we repeatedly forced her to use against all of the Darkners. And even though normally Noelle notices Susie first, this time she notices Chris first. Even though Noelle still thinks up to this point that everything that happened was a dream, it's clearly left a huge impact on her. She's still very clearly shaken from what's happened. And once again, unlike how it usually goes, when you try to leave, Rudy asks to see Susie privately, leaving Chris and Noelle entirely isolated with the player. Noelle is trying to rationalize everything in her mind outside of the hospital room. She tries convincing herself still that it was just a dream, but something about it just felt so real. She's noticed Chris acting different lately. She wonders how nobody else has noticed Chris changed, something she does once again later in the route. This change in Chris is us, the soul, the player puppeteering them. The exact dialogue from Noelle in this scene depends on your actions. If you just respond to her, she'll be shocked that Chris is standing there. She gets noticeably more afraid, and she notices the change in Chris's voice. If you're wearing her watch, she picks up on that, and if you use the controls, it'll actually move Chris towards her. Regardless of specific outcome, Susie still assumes that Noelle must be afraid of her again. This plays into one of the main recurring patterns in the Weird Route, distance being forced between Susie and Noelle. Once again, this lines up with another pattern that abusers often use, isolation of their victims. The player, once again, takes the role of the abuser, and is isolating Noelle from Susie. It's honestly sad. Susie doesn't even have any idea what specifically is wrong. She just remarks that if only Noelle knew that everything that happened wasn't a dream, completely unaware of the cruel irony of that statement. This isn't even just limited to Noelle either. Chris is also a victim of the player. During the Weird Route, distance is also wedged between Chris and Susie, and Chris is the one we're actively forcing to do things they don't want to. And perhaps most importantly, The player is exploiting already existing issues in the minds of both Chris and Noelle. I, apologize for getting a little emotional there. I know I'm a really sensitive person. It's just that some of the stuff in this route is pretty heavy when you think about it. But from this point on, the vast majority of the Weird Route's content is specifically in the light world. As of right now, there's no other dark world significantly affected by the Weird Route. Chapter 3 does have some small little interactions, but it's not nearly enough for its own segment. It does have the mantle minigame, but it's not part of the Weird Route itself, and I've already covered that previously, so I'm going to skip over Chapter 3. But quickly there's going to be a brief little intermission. It's nothing super crazy. I would just like to thank two people real quick. First, I would like to thank Elin for drawing this video's thumbnail and becoming my new thumbnail artist. She also happened to draw the art I use for my profile picture and my profile banner. She is insanely talented, and I'm very grateful for her doing this for me. Secondly, I would like to thank Lilico for this fan art right here. I really like how it turned out. It looks honestly adorable, and I really like it. There's also a third person I would like to thank before we move on, too. Thank you to Sana Coinlemon from the Discord for agreeing to voice Noelle. She is very good at being the voice actress for Noelle, and overall, I just really am happy with how it turned out. Anyways, that's the end of the intermission. Let's now move on to Chapter 4. In comparison to Chapter 2, Chapter 4 has significantly less Weird Route content. The Dark World is almost entirely unaffected by your actions in the Weird Route, and the main plot of the chapter essentially plays out the same way regardless. However, just like how Chapter 4 is the biggest turning point for the main story of Deltarune, Chapter 4 is also perhaps the biggest turning point for the Weird Route as well. Before Chapter 4 dropped, the widespread consensus in the fandom was that each chapter in the Weird Route would involve the player manipulating a specific character that Chris was close with, essentially using all of their friends for our advantage. However, once Chapter 4 released, the conversation quickly changed. It became clear that the Weird Route is intrinsically tied to Noelle. Up to this point, we just assumed that it would be a genocide route by proxy, but all of the theories that were popular about the Weird Route from the Chapter 2 era ended up getting thrown into the garbage once Chapter 4 released, and the end result ended up being much more disturbing than we could have predicted. Chapter 4 essentially changed the face of the Weird Route, and alongside that, it changed how the fanbase viewed the Weird Route. So, without further ado, here we go. The first changes for Chapter 4 can be found right after the church service when you're looking for clues to give to Susie. This time Noelle doesn't have dialogue options. She instead asks to talk with Chris later on that day. To actually get the clue that's normally tied to her, you have to talk to her father, Rudy. Unlike the Weird Route content from earlier, this moment isn't exactly eerie or unnerving in any way. It feels as if things have almost gone back to normal. Not 100% back to normal, as Noelle is still acting a little bit different, but just enough to instill a false sense of security. At the end of the clue-gathering sequence, Noelle, unlike usual, actually ends up being the one who asks Chris and Susie to come over to her house later. Normally, you have to get Susie to approach her and ask. This is another instance of Noelle gaining at least some level of confidence. The lack of any music, though, makes this scene feel extremely awkward, and when Susie goes to do the high five that normally happens, Chris doesn't jump up as well. They just stand there, not moving. It's possible that Chris could be frozen in fear, or perhaps it could be an instance of them denying us control, denying us the ability to move them and potentially hurt Noelle even more. Given what ends up happening in this chapter, that interpretation makes sense to me. Susie also delivers a very iconic line. I mean, I'm just sorry, cut the music for a second. She really says, "Hey, maybe things took a weird route just now." Like, I mean, come on. Even in the most depressing, dark, horrifying route Toby Fox has ever made, somehow this man still manages to sneak in some absolute peak comedy. Before going to the Holiday Mansion, though, there's one other Weird Route exclusive thing you can go and see. At the second room in the hospital next to Rudy, there's a familiar face, Birdley. As said before, he's still alive, but he's in a comatose state and completely unresponsive. And based on the sheer damage dealt to him from the Snowgrave spell, personally, I'd say it's very likely that he's fallen down, the state that monsters go into immediately before death. And as mentioned before, this change is permanent. Even if you decide to not continue the weird route, Birdley never wakes up. For the rest of the game, he's confined to the hospital room, in a comatose state and unable to do anything. A permanent reminder of your actions. The Holiday Mansion starts off mostly normal, save for the phone call. Since Birdley's in the hospital, instead, Carol calls Noelle. Notably, Noelle mentions that she took her father home, as in the hospital. Rudy's been staying there so long and Noelle's been seeing him so much that it's basically a home. It's really sad. What Noelle is going through is really hard for anybody to deal with, let alone a high schooler like she is. Her big sister is implied to either be missing or potentially dead, her father is severely ill and in the hospital, and her mother is too preoccupied with her job to really spend a lot of quality time with her, and when she is there, she's emotionally cold and strict. Hometown, a small town in the middle of nowhere, never really changes. Each day is like another loop of a cycle. Everything's stagnant, so the foundations for Noelle to feel resentment at her situation are definitely there, but those don't really get addressed in this chapter. Regardless, everything goes normally until just after Chris rips the soul out of their body. Noelle and Chris go into her room, in private, away from the player. We navigate our way through the vents just like normal, but instead of reaching the basement, we have to go right into the vents in the walls of Noelle's room. At first, there isn't any music. Chris and Noelle aren't yet aware of us being nearby. The lack of music and the fact that it transitions into a flashback dialogue makes it feel like something the player isn't supposed to see, but in a completely different way from everything else. Everything else so far has felt like something we aren't supposed to see in an uncanny, off-script way. The talk between Chris and Noelle feels like something we aren't supposed to see in a much more private, intimate kind of way. We learn from this dialogue why Noelle isn't acting as scared as we would have expected her to be. At some point in the time between chapters 3 and 4, Chris attempted to undo everything we did. They took Birdley to the hospital, removed the thorn from Noelle's finger, told her that everything was gonna be okay, it's just a dumb prank. Chris's voice, for once, isn't corrupted by the player. Their normal voice, their deadpan, mumbly voice is back. But little do they both know that we're currently spying on them. As the soul, the player is violating the privacy of both characters. We are directly listening in on their conversation, and it makes everything feel uncomfortable. And now it makes sense why Chris took control away from us right after Noelle asked to meet us. Chris didn't want us to know that they attempted to undo everything, because if we found out, they know, we would try to undo their attempts to fix things. When Noelle asks if she can ask something else, we're given the choice to either say please don't, or proceed. Answering proceed, though, teleports the soul directly into the room, allowing the player to regain control of Chris. We've now gone from observing their conversation to actively interfering with it. Circling back to the themes of abuse, this is another tactic a lot of abusers use. They don't give their victims any privacy. Even in their private, intimate conversations with close friends, oftentimes they'll spy in, interfere, stop things from going in a way that they don't want. The player, once again, is essentially playing the role of Noelle's abuser. Chris, on the contrary, wants to help Noelle, and is actively trying to stop us from getting our way. They are actively trying to interfere with the player's plans in order to protect their friend. Ultimately, Chris and Noelle in this route are both victims of the player. Chris is being forced to do things against their will just as much as Noelle is. But, in a cruel twist of fate, their attempts to reverse our actions turned out to be for nothing. Because now that we have control over their body again, the route is set back into motion.
Chris, it's okay. It's just us. You just said not to mention any of that because it would get heard.
Noelle then asks Chris who is going to hear them, and unbeknownst to her, a familiar voice is ready to answer. The atmosphere of the scene completely changes. The lighting, once vibrant and saturated, becomes cold and lifeless. The snowflake decorations, once stationary, now sway gently in the presence of the soul. And Noelle, once calm and reassuring, is completely and utterly terrified. The player has done more than just do something they weren't supposed to. We've done something more than just break the fourth wall. We have directly communicated with Noelle. We have just done something that shouldn't be possible. Even if we haven't made it clear what the true nature of our presence really is, we've made one thing clear. We are not the Chris she knows. We are something else. Nothing about the scene so far is outright horrifying, but everything about it is designed to feel wrong. The fact the soul now has its own first-person dialogue, the abrupt shift in the lighting and tone, the sudden blast of wind that accompanies the soul making its presence known, and, perhaps the biggest thing of all, the ambience. The ambience that plays can barely even be considered music. It's more like an isolated, repeating wall of noise. The actual sound itself, although heavily distorted, almost sounds like a set of tides crashing on the shore, except echoed and used to horrifying effect. The fact that it resembles the sound of water completely clashes with the visuals as well. This makes the sound feel jarring and out of place. The complete mismatch between the visuals and the audio sends your brain into a scramble trying to find a way to connect them. The end result is a gut feeling that things are deeply wrong. The harsh vignette that appears plays into the horror magnificently too. It leaves no distractions from the scene that's unfolding right now. In addition to this, though, it also makes it feel as though Chris and Noelle are trapped where they are. None of their surroundings are visible because they're stuck within the vignette, and the vignette narrows your vision so you're only able to focus on them. And in a sense, it makes the player feel somewhat trapped as well, despite the fact that it was their own choices that led them here. This moment disproves as well that the player is just some passive observer that occasionally makes decisions. It's evident based on how the environment is affected that the player has real power in this world. Power other than the choices we can make in the text boxes. We are not just a character in the story. We are a being beyond the other character's comprehension. We are the player. We exist outside of the game's boundaries. In a sense, this scene almost serves as cosmic horror, except this time, it's from the Eldritch God's perspective. We, the Eldritch God, the player of Deltarune, confirm multiple things to Noelle in this scene. We confirm to her that everything in Chapter 2 was real, none of it was a dream. We confirm that she isn't safe, even in her own mind. We can hear her every thought. We confirm to her that the snow fell. It did snow. By the time you confirm this to her, you've already passed up the last confirmed chance to abort the route. Beyond that, none of your choices matter anymore, and you confirm one final thing to her. You confirm to Noelle that she will get stronger. The tone indicating your progress once again plays, deepened and warped. Using Chris as your puppet, you withdraw the thorn ring, and slowly, one choice box at a time, push Chris to re-equip the thorn ring on Noelle. The snowflakes spin faster as the tension picks up. A new ambience takes hold, one that's faster and more frantic than the other one. It's so warped and distorted that it's impossible to even identify what the sound is supposed to be. Noelle starts shaking, panicking. No matter how hard she tries, she can't move. She can't look away. She can barely even speak. Just like Chris, Noelle is now a prisoner inside her own body. She's stuck, forced to watch helplessly as the thing controlling her childhood friend forces them closer and closer to her, thorn ring in hand. Her story and Chris's story are about to be irreversibly changed, all because of one entity's morbid curiosity. She desperately pleads, tries to stammer out a sentence, but then the thing controlling Chris grabs her, and the thorn ring is equipped once again. The thorn ring has been equipped back onto Noelle, and now Noelle has finally been broken. Any semblance of the shy, kind, sweet, caring girl she was at the start of this route have been stripped away. A scar has been inflicted on her from which she never recovers in the route. The gold within her has been taken out, and now the ugly, writhing mass beneath festers and rises to the surface. The darkness within her that we already saw earlier in the route stops being hidden, and all of it is because of us. There is nobody else to blame except the player. You have done this to yourself. You exploited this girl, you used her for your own gain, and now you have no choice but to face the consequences. Now, with this scene, there's a bit of an elephant in the room that I have to address. The version of the scene you just saw was not the original version on release. Originally, the red dot that appears over the black screen when the thorn ring is re-equipped onto Noelle was a red rose that appeared on a black screen. That, once you equipped the thorn ring back on, wilted as its petals fell off one by one. It was, more likely than anything else, meant to represent how Noelle's layers of defense were gradually stripped away, her innocence taken from her, almost as though it were a petal plucked from a flower. However, many people unfortunately misinterpreted it as an allegory for sexual assault. They interpreted the wilting rose as deflowering, and many people believed that in this moment, the player was forcing Chris to sexually assault Noelle. This then resulted in an update which changed the red rose into a red dot that appears in the version I got my footage on, and then after that, the red dot was then replaced with a red crack appearing, almost as though the player was literally shattering the fourth wall. I want to make something absolutely 100% clear with everybody watching this. This scene, in no way, shape, or form, is meant to depict sexual assault. It is not meant to be read as an allegory for sexual assault. However, if you are a victim of sexual assault, or if you are the victim of any traumatic event adjacent to sexual assault, and this moment made you feel seen and made you feel heard, then that is 100% real and valid. And nobody, I repeat, absolutely nobody, has any right to tell you otherwise. Even though this scene does not depict sexual assault or rape in any way, you have every right to feel seen and to feel heard. And if you are a victim of sexual assault or any other adjacent traumatic event, then genuinely, from one internet stranger to another, I am deeply sorry for what you've had to go through. While I cannot even begin to understand just how much lasting damage it causes, nor can I begin to understand the pain that results, I want you to know that you are not alone. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. And if this scene makes you feel that way, then you have every right to feel that. When it comes to the effects of this scene in-universe, other than the effects on Noelle I've already described, it also undoes everything Chris has done up to this point to try and stop us. Everything they did. Their attempt to get Birdley medical care, removing the thorn ring from Noelle's finger, trying to make everything right. All of it, because of the player, was for nothing. The mind of their childhood best friend has been shattered, and something else has been erected in its place. The fate of both Chris and Noelle has been sealed by the player, and so Chris utilizes the little bit of power they have over us by this point, and they take out all of their sorrow, all of their rage, all of their despair onto the soul. Chris uses all of their strength to pummel and beat the soul ruthlessly. They're only stopped when Asgore, their adoptive father, knocks on the bathroom door. The saddest part of this is that even though it doesn't hurt us, as we're at the other side of the screen, Chris does get hurt by this. As soon as they reinsert the soul, they immediately absorb all of the damage dealt to it. If you check the menus after this, Chris is at 10 HP out of 20. They beat themselves halfway to death. And presumably, had Asgore not knocked on the door, Chris might have beaten the soul to the point where it would have killed them. This is the only time in game where Chris displays this much anger. They're usually a very calm, taciturn character. They don't express their emotions outwardly all that much. Most of the time, trying to piece together their emotions comes from the dialogue of other characters, as well as small little body language cues. Here, though, Chris doesn't hold back. It's blatantly obvious just how furious they are, how much they absolutely hate the player, how much they despise us for what we did, and it reinforces the gravity of our actions. After this, the visit to the Holiday Manor gets cut short. Susie notices how Noelle was acting weird. They didn't really get to hang out. The rain starts to fall like usual, and Susie stops before the church to ask Chris what they and Noelle were talking about, and then suddenly, everything goes quiet. The choice box is completely blank, the rain stops, and the screen gets a reddish tint. It's likely that this is a result of Chris trying to stop us with all of their strength from saying anything. The sudden, abrupt cut of all sound, the abrupt change in visuals, the glitched and broken text box. Everything makes this scene feel so bizarre. It doesn't just feel off script anymore, it feels broken. Like the game itself is starting to come apart at the seams, if only for just this moment. It also shows just how desperate Chris is. They're so desperate to stop us from interfering more. They're doing absolutely everything, using all of their energy to silence us. Eventually, Susie breaks the silence, and from there, they enter the first church dark world as usual. For most of the chapter, it's as though nothing ever happened.
How long did it take her to smile?
There's one easy to miss scene in Chapter 4. It happens while Susie is talking to Gerson, and on the weird route, you're given the option to think of Noelle. I unfortunately did not get footage of this scene, but in the scene, Noelle slowly says thank you, as we're only given a vision of the red dot, slightly moving, before the screen then flashes red, and Chris is woken back up. The red flash, in my opinion, is likely Chris experiencing a flashback to whatever incident happened in the first Dark World, the one alluded to towards the end of Chapter 5. It's sad to see Noelle in this state, because of the player's manipulation of her, because of our gaslighting, our abuse. She now sees what was done to her as a positive, and she thanks us, because why wouldn't she? Why wouldn't she thank the person responsible for what she now sees as a positive?
Where will it happen?
Ralsei's dialogue also gets slightly changed at the end. He notes that if there's more than one ending, how do we know it won't end up being something even worse than the end of the prophecy? Aside from what I've talked about, though, the rest of the chapter mostly plays out as normal, except for the ending. Unlike the normal ending, Susie never calls out to Chris. Distance has formed between Susie and Chris as a direct result of our actions. Instead, Chris receives a call from Carol, Noelle's mother, asking if they're going to the festival tomorrow, because Noelle said she's really looking forward to seeing them. The red dot is shown again, faintly, and now it's significantly larger. The screen going black the way it does puts an absolute pit in the player's stomach. Nothing good is going to happen the next day at the festival, and Chris knows this. It creates such a genuinely unrivaled sense of absolute dread. But even this is gonna look like nothing compared.
You only need to see her once, and you'll move on.
The red dot shows up again. This time, it's even bigger. Noelle thanks us again. Noelle is not the same anymore. Chris wakes up. The festival was today. They didn't leave their room the entire day, though, and they missed everything. To get Chris out of bed, you have to rapidly mash buttons. Chris is actively fighting us as much as they can. We're essentially dragging them out of the bed, kicking and screaming. This carries over to the rest of their movement too. They walk much slower and stumble a lot. We can't sprint. Chris is trying everything to stop us. And just like the blank choice box, interacting with anything just results in an empty dialogue box. It doesn't feel like the game is just starting to break anymore. The game feels fully broken. We've essentially shredded the game's normal script and created our own. one that was never meant to exist. Nothing outright disturbing has happened in the Chapter 5 Weird Route yet, but everything feels off. Chris's slower movement than usual, the broken, glitchy dialogue boxes, the lack of ambience save for the birds chirping. It makes you feel like something's missing, and it makes it clear just how terrified Chris is. This is the most they've ever resisted our control. They know something very bad is gonna happen if they meet up with Noelle. They are completely terrified. Toriel's concerned dialogue only furthers this notion. In addition, though, it reinforces the off-script nature of everything. Chris staying in their room for the entire festival was not something the script of the game had planned, and as such, the characters react accordingly. There's no progression to be found in keeping Chris at home, though. So, to move the plot forward, you have to go outside. Susie's waiting for Chris. The sun is already setting. Susie got to see the festival with Noelle. Things are tense. Susie just leans against the house, looking cold. But right as Chris is about to leave, Susie notices something is off. So, to try to cheer Chris up, she tags along, deciding to see what's left of the festival together with Chris. And then the music starts. This is it, the full version of H.OGG that was teased on the Deltarune website. It is the theme of Hometown, except played on a different instrument, and this time, no other instruments to back it up. It makes it feel hollow, empty, isolated, alone. It fits the atmosphere of Hometown, because now, everybody's left to go see the festival king and queen crowned. Chris and Susie are seemingly the only ones left at the festival. The sound of the guitar itself works wonders in this song for the atmosphere. It sounds old, like it's about to fall apart, and as a result, the rest of the song feels like it's trying to be a normal track, but it can't help but just feel a little uncanny. And even though the song is an imitation of the Hometown theme, it still doesn't let you forget the impending consequences to your actions. As in the song, you can hear the sound of wind blowing and sleigh bells. It's as though the music is trying to imitate the normal Hometown theme to distract you, but it's unable to, as the sound of your actions slowly creeps in. It's fitting in a way, just like how Susie is trying to distract Chris and make them feel better, even though soon, Chris is about to face the consequences of our mistakes. The sunset's lighting really sells the atmosphere. It's very thematically appropriate. It's still technically bright out. Chris is still having a little bit of fun with Susie at what remains of the festival, but that light is starting to fade. The sun is setting. The good times are coming to an end. This is the last time Chris is going to get to be happy in the Weird Route. There's still some kind of funny moments. For example, there's a reference to Burger King foot lettuce in here, but it doesn't hit the same as the normal route. There's still a solemn, somber tone to everything. And not only has Chris been robbed of all the fun they would have had at the normal festival, the player has been too. Your own actions, your own drive to see more, your own morbid curiosity robbed you of all of the fun you would have had. Now, just like Chris, you're left to just try to enjoy what you can with the scraps of the festival. The only mandatory interaction here is with Sans. He doesn't have any ice cream ready yet, but he does have a piece of bread. Notably, the bread leaves crumbs behind everywhere you go, and on the punch card he gives you, Susie draws 3 figures. Herself, Chris, and Ralsei, just like the Don't Forget drawing in the hidden room in Sans' house in Undertale. This seems to outright confirm, at least for me, the theory that Sans Undertale is the same as Sans Deltarune. However, even with that aside, it's very evident that Sans knows more than he lets on. He keeps up his usual unserious personality, but the fact that he gave you bread that specifically leaves crumbs behind implies that he knows the crumbs might come in handy. Sans is really good at reading people, so it tracks that he would probably notice something is wrong with Chris, and it tracks that he would probably have a gut feeling that eventually he might need to go look for them. And of course, there's one other huge Undertale connection in this sequence. The music that plays in the game files is referred to as Happy Town. Just like the song in the Undertale sound test room, it was already somewhat known that the hometown track had the Happy Town motif in it, but now there's a solid connection to the sound test room established. One of its songs has now been straight up used by name in Deltarune. Given this information, we can deduce that every other sound test song will be used in Deltarune at some point in the future, likely in the order they show up in during the sound test. Happy Town, which has already been used, Meat Factory, Trouble Dingle, and Gaster's theme. Gaster being connected to Deltarune is now no longer just a theory, it is now fact. How exactly he's involved is still unknown, but I think it's very likely that the mysterious voice that speaks to us in the game over screen is Gaster. This is his Deltarune, and based on the fact that we're likely going to hear his theme at some point in the game, it's very likely that in the future of the Weird Route, we're going to meet him. There's also multiple clues in-game, such as the fried dough balls sold by the normal NPC during the normal route, as well as the protein dialogue from Pink post-fight, that there is a meat factory location. However, other people have already theorized about this, and they've done way better than I ever could, so I think I should move on from this discussion for right now. There's not much left to do, except to go see Noelle. Susie has a genuinely heartfelt conversation with Chris about how important they are to her, and it's sad, given that after what happens next, this might be the last time Chris and Susie ever get to see each other. Without realizing it, Susie has just given a final goodbye to Chris. They won't be showing up at the Castle Town tomorrow. It's worth noting that apparently Ralsei also knew something was wrong. He had a feeling that something bad was going to happen to Chris. And apparently, Noelle gave Susie, or at least tried to give her, a huge amount of money, everything she had, and Susie notes how Noelle was unusually cheerful that day. This corresponds almost exactly to people who are planning their suicide. Even though Noelle isn't actually trying to commit suicide, with what happens next, it's clear she's never gonna see hometown again, so she's giving away all of her things. She's happy because she knows soon it's all gonna be over. We drove her to this point. And if I can get a bit personal with everybody for a second, I completely understand how Noelle feels here. I haven't actually attempted on my own life before, but my mental health has had a history of being very challenging for me, and there have been several points in my life where I've honestly considered and even planned to just end everything. Thankfully, even though I'm not doing perfect, the depression is still there. I was able to get help, and once again, even if I'm not amazing now, I'm doing better than I was before. If anybody watching this feels that way, please know you are not alone. And even if including this in a video about Deltarune might seem silly to some people, if you or anybody else you know are experiencing suicidal thoughts, please call 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. The number is also on screen right now. Suicide is never the answer. If you live outside of the US, please try to find the equivalent number for your country and call if you're experiencing those thoughts. This might be the most personal I've ever gotten here on YouTube, and I apologize for how sudden this might have been. And now, all that's left is to see her. The wind blows harshly, the lighting is stark, the screen is tinted red, just like the color of the soul. The next sequence is really dialogue heavy, so there won't be voice acting for it. I'm just gonna do my best to try and go through what Noelle says and what happens. She begins her monologue within her own mind, her own thoughts, because she knows we can hear her. Every part of her, every cell in her body was screaming at her to run away yesterday. Something was screaming at her that if she didn't, she would be dragged down into a place where no one is supposed to go. Noelle encapsulates two trauma responses, fawn and freeze. She freezes, unable to move, instinctively locking up. And she fawns over us afterwards. She views what we did to her as a positive in order to cope with what happened. And now she's not scared to be dragged down anymore. She wants it. Ever since Des left, ever since she lost her big sister, she's spent her life just following the path set for her. Every day has been a cycle. Getting good grades, being a good daughter, staying quiet, mourning Des, all of it on an endless loop, to the point where now it feels like she's just been looking at herself through a window, watching somebody else move her through her life. The resentment she has towards Hometown boils to the surface. Hometown is stagnant. Nothing ever changes. She wanted to get out of this loop. She wanted to break free. But she couldn't, because according to her, she was just a Noelle that had to do Noelle things, just like Chris had to do Chris things. Except Chris somehow managed to change, because we took over them. We entered the picture, and using the weird route, we were able to go off the game's script. We were able to start to break free. Noelle is now aware of the nature of Hometown. Hometown isn't a town, it's a location in a video game. She might not literally know this, but she's aware now that it essentially functions like it. Nobody else has noticed how Chris changed, because they were never supposed to. They were never coded to. Their scripts never had it outlined. But now that the player has forced things to go off script, the people of Hometown have no choice but to notice. And now, being around the new, possessed Chris is making Noelle stronger too. And when she cast Snowgrave all the way back in Chapter 2, it made her feel stronger than she ever has before in her entire life. She's grown stronger because of us, not only in terms of pure stats, but because now, thanks to us, she's also been able to go off script. And now she's gaining more and more power to defy the game's rules. The framing of this entire scene is absolutely brilliant. For almost the entire scene, Chris is fully shadowed out, making Noelle's dialogue feel much more directed directly at the player, not Chris, in a way that feels like her dialogue portraits are looking through the screen, staring and talking directly to us. The more stark use of shadows when compared with the festival really makes it clear that darkness is encroaching. The music here, too, does an excellent job at carrying this scene. The altered version of the flashback music really feels crazed and demented, just like Noelle has become, just like how we've made Noelle. Unlike the normal flashback music, this version is a waltz, and the electric guitar parts that come fading in and out make it abundantly clear something horrible is coming. The most terrifying part of this moment, though, is undeniably the facial expressions shown on Noelle. They look genuinely crazed, maddened, and they feel off-model in a way that's uncanny and wrong. It's as though the expressions were never meant for her face. Like the faces were made for somebody else, but then put onto Noelle by accident.
Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail. The poor children.
Noelle wants to do something. She wants to do something crazy. She wants to go somewhere no one else has gone before. The place that her, Chris, December, and Azrael all wanted to see as kids. Beyond where the forest would grow. The other side of the lake. The other side of the lake is never shown in game, and so the player has absolutely no idea what to expect. And as such, the most primal fear of all is evoked. The fear of the unknown. The player at this point might desperately try to stop this from happening, but it's far too late to go back. You made your choice already. Noelle takes Chris's trembling hands and awaits the word she's heard so many times. It doesn't actually matter if you say proceed or not. If you refuse, Noelle still proceeds forward anyway. She still forces things to carry out in this way. Now, just like Chris, you are trapped. You have trapped Chris, Noelle, and yourself, all because you wanted to see what happened. The music cuts out, only replaced with the sound of Chris and Noelle walking further and further into the lake as the water gets deeper and deeper and they become more and more submerged. Eventually, even the illusion of choice is gone. All options are replaced with proceed. The water reaches up to their necks. It starts to get dangerous, but they're getting further. Chris and Noelle put their heads up for air as the ambience starts to swell. They become almost fully submerged and things start to fade to white. In order to progress, you have to mash proceed as fast as you can. Each time, the damage sound effect plays. Chris starts to inhale the water as their mouth is forced open every single time you say proceed. They both become fully submerged underwater. You can't even see a single part of them poking out to the surface anymore. The water starts to get lighter. You start to approach the edge of the world. You are now about to perform the biggest boundary break of the game. You are about to go more off-script than you ever have in this route up to this point. Chris begins to suffocate and drown as even the text box turns red. The light is getting closer and closer. The ambience is getting louder and louder and faster. You have to keep spamming proceed over and over again, even quicker. The light becomes overwhelming. Even the text box starts to fade out as Noelle screams at you to keep saying proceed. Eventually, you can't even see your options anymore. You just have to blindly mash over and over and over and over again until eventually everything fades. Suddenly, the screen changes to a point of view first-person shot of somebody looking at a monitor, and the monitor says, "Insert Chapter 7. Side B." You're then kicked back to the chapter select screen, and internally, the game sets a flag in the global code that you've completed the Chapter 5 Weird Route. The entire lake sequence is, without exaggeration, without hyperbole, the most terrifying thing I've experienced in a video game. The fact that it's not even one smooth motion, you have to constantly press proceed. You have to constantly force Chris and Noelle forward. It makes this moment feel slow and excruciating, almost as though you're actively holding both of them underwater in real time. Everything about it overwhelms the senses, the extremely bright light constantly fading in, paired with the extremely loud ambience that gets louder and louder and more distorted as you go farther. The fact that eventually you can't even see what you're pressing anymore, but you still have to spam it. And of course, the blur that starts to appear, which makes Noelle's face almost unable to be read. And then there's of course the cut to the monitor. The fact that it specifically says to insert Chapter 7 Side B is very reminiscent of older games, where the additional content would have to be put onto a separate disc. It's as though the main disc of Deltarune did not have any room for the Weird Route, and so a separate disc has to be inserted to continue the story. What exactly happens towards the end of the lake scene isn't really known currently. However, I personally have my own theory about it. We know from Undertale that monsters have the ability to absorb human souls, and that once they do, they gain a considerable amount of power. Given that the Weird Route has been themed around gaining power to break the narrative so far, and the fact that Chris seems to be drowning in this scene, I think it's very likely that Chris did drown, but Noelle didn't. I think Noelle absorbed the soul, and now she has become our vessel. Moreover, the last sprite of Noelle is not underwater, and there's a light illuminating her face from below. As such, I think that while she's absorbing the soul, she's also clipping out of bounds and into the shelter, deep within it, by the meat factory area, where Chapter 7 will likely take place. I specifically point out the meat factory part because we know that the swarm of Image Friend and ERAM both lurk within the shelter as their base of operation, and we know that Image Friend is devoted almost exclusively to seeking out sources of protein in food, just like meat. And since Undyne is currently preserved in ice, I think it's very likely that there's a meat factory location deep in the shelter, below the lake. When we put the thorn ring back onto Noelle, we may have given her a bit of determination, just enough to give her more power, but also an amount small enough to not cause her to melt and deform like the amalgamates. And once again, since she gets stronger around us to the point where she can now break the narrative, absorbing the soul straight up would give her more than enough power she would need, more than enough power to eventually break free, like she wanted. And the theme of abuse returns once again. Our possessiveness of Noelle has escalated to the point where now we are using her as a vessel. Our treatment of her has brought out the darkest parts of her. She still has agency, but now all of the parts that were previously buried under the surface have now been drudged up and take the forefront. It becomes a toxic dynamic. We are trapped by her, and she is trapped by us. Both the player and Noelle now need to rely on each other, despite the fact that both are using the other as a puppet. There is an alternative outcome of the lake scene. You basically let the screen fade to white and Noelle says that nothing changed, she was wrong, and everything like that. Things mostly resume as normal, but Chris is still noticeably affected by the previous scene. It's a bit of a topic of debate over whether or not this is a continuation of the weird route in an alternate way, or if it's a straight-up abortion of the weird route. I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't know, and I won't be including the minor Chapter 5 changes that come with that outcome, because, frankly, I don't know if it's part of the weird route or not. One thing definitely remains for certain, though. The main weird route is undeniably defying the prophecy. We skip all of Chapter 5 and 6, and as a result, the panel of the Flower Man trapped in an asylum never happens. But we're probably in for something way worse than the end of the prophecy. Something that'll probably break the boundaries between Gaster and the rest of the game, and it could end with the player potentially destroying the very survey program that keeps us connected to the world of Deltarune, potentially erasing Deltarune's world as a whole and resulting in the Goners. Or maybe I could be wrong. After all, pretty much every major theory about the weird route was proven wrong when Chapter 5 released. Who's to say that my theory is any different? And if I'm wrong, then you know what? That's okay. There's a weird sentiment I've noticed in the Deltarune community where every single theory has to tick every single box and explain every little thing, and if even a slight detail doesn't line up, then the entire thing is discredited and mocked. Theory crafting should be fun. It's okay to get things wrong. Plus, there are a lot of mysteries related to the weird route I didn't even cover in this video. Mysteries such as where the Thorn Ring even came from in the first place, how it ended up with Spampton, how ERAM is involved with it, how it relates back to the Shadow Mantle minigame, and what I think is the most fascinating mystery, how the weird route exactly ties into the hypothetical Twisted Sword route. Then again though, perhaps it's best I save the discussion of all of these things for another time. In any event, the weird route is an absolute masterclass in psychological horror. It demonstrates a complete and total understanding for how to evoke fear in the player. It uses the meta aspects of Deltarune against you. It holds you directly accountable for your actions, your choice to break the narrative, all while expertly conveying its themes of abuse, power, and player manipulation. In summary, I feel that Deltarune's forbidden path, the weird route, can be summed up with a quote by Cesar A. Cruz: "Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable." Well everybody, there you have it. That was my video on the Deltarune weird route, the forbidden path. I'm sure I missed some things, I'm sure the video wasn't perfect, but honestly, I'm happy with how it's turned out. I genuinely hope you enjoyed it. Sincerely, I do. The weird route is a very fascinating subject to me, and Deltarune as a whole really is masterfully written. This video took me about 3 weeks or so to make. You could probably tell it took a little bit based on the intro and when this released. The guy I quoted, I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name. And if you liked this video, then feel free to leave a like, comment, hype the video up, or subscribe to the channel. It's up to you, honestly. You don't have to, but it would be greatly appreciated. I would like to give a special thanks to Sana once again for being the voice of Noelle, a thank you to Lilico for this fan art, and a thank you to Elin for becoming my new thumbnail artist. As an additional thank you to Rianne for this genuinely lovely commission she made for me. Like, I'm really happy with how it turned out. It looks amazing. She is a seriously talented artist, so Rianne, thank you. If you would like to follow me elsewhere, honestly, I'd say my Discord is my best bet. I've recently deleted Twitter, and I'm barely active on Blue Sky, so yeah. So anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.